It's Get Outta Here. I'm Warren Levinson. It's migration season. We've got people from the northern climates seeking relief from the winters dark and cold in the tropics and the subtropics, for example. But now that we're more than halfway through the winter, some species whose annual migration takes a lot longer than the JetBlue flight from New York to Fort Lauderdale are already leaving on their long journey. We're talking about bird migration, specifically the migration of sandhill cranes from their winter homes in Texas and Mexico to their summer places in Alaska and Canada. For millions of years, these spindly-legged waterbirds have been flocking to the North Platte River in Nebraska, which turns out to be an excellent rest stop. Good shallow water, abundant food. Watching the sandhill cranes come through has become a tourist attraction in south-central Nebraska, and one, according to Beth Harpaz, the former Associated Press travel editor and the award-winning former host of this program, one not to be missed. We went to see her the other day to talk about it and to reflect on the meaning of migration for humans as well as for birds. Beth Harpaz, we are friends a long time. We are colleagues a long time. And here's a couple of things I know about you. You are a proud member of the 50-state club. And in that 50-state jaunt over the course of your lifetime, number 50, the last one you went to, was Nebraska. So what's the deal with Nebraska?
Well, actually, it wasn't the last one I went to. I actually have been to Nebraska twice. Nebraska was actually one of probably the first 10 states I went to, but I didn't remember much about it except that there were a lot of cornfields there. And I, in my 50-state travels, have learned that I love nature and scenery and, just being outside. I'm not really a bird watcher, but if I see a bird, I get very excited. So I decided that even though I had already ticked Nebraska off my list, I was actually going to go back because I had heard about this incredible phenomenon of the sandhill cranes on the Platte River. More than 500,000 of them go to Nebraska every year, and that just seemed like an opportunity that was worth going back to Nebraska for.
Okay, 500,000 sandhill cranes, the Platte River of Nebraska. So, tell me what that's like. Tell me about these cranes to start with. What kind of bird is this? What does it look like?
So it's just a big kind of water bird. It's not especially beautiful or striking. I think what's amazing about this phenomenon is just the sheer number of the birds and the story of the birds. They've found bones that are 9 million years old of these birds in this place. What is it that brings them back there every year? They tend to go, they say the dates are like roughly Valentine's Day to Tax Day. So February 14 to April 15th is when they come. And they've been coming for literally millions of years and, hundreds of thousands of them. The river is very shallow. It's full of these sandbars, and the birds are on this incredible migration from Texas and Mexico all the way up to Alaska and Siberia. And so this is kind of midway in between. There's sources of food on the river for them, of course, but it's also a place where they can feel very protected because they sit and roost on these shallow sandbars all night, and they can, I guess, kind of look out for predators. During the day, they go to the nearby cornfields, which is what I saw on my very first trip to Nebraska, and they eat the leftover grain, that didn't get picked up during the harvest. In fact, the farmers don't plant until the birds are gone. They don't plant the new crops. What they ate 9 million years ago, I don't know, but, it's the plains. There's fields. I guess there must have been food for them. So during the day, you can drive around and see them, in the cornfields, but they're so easily spooked that you're not supposed to harass them, obviously. Even if you get out of your car, they take off. So you just kind of look at them from the side of the road. What happens at sunset, though, is amazing because you go down to a couple of places in the area of Kearney, Nebraska, which is a few hours west of Omaha. And people gather at bridges and these pullouts by the side of the road on the river. And the birds take off in these incredible swarms, thousands and thousands of them. At first there's like one or two as the sun starts to set, and then as it gets darker and darker, they're just peeling off hundreds and thousands at a time. The sky and the air is just filled with this incredible cacophony. They form these beautiful undulating patterns in the sky, and they go and they seek out, these sandbars where they then all kind of roost together for the night, just kind of gently, clucking and murmuring. And then again, at sunrise, there's this opposite thing where they take off from the sandbars and they go back to the cornfields. What I love about this is, like, I'm not a professional bird watcher. Sometimes I go on bird watching walks and I can never see the birds because people are like, oh, there's the yellow-bellied grosbeak in the top of that pine tree. And I have I can't find it. I can't see it. I don't know what they're talking about. You can't miss these birds. The Sandhill cranes, there's so many, thousands of them. It's really this overwhelming phenomenon that makes you feel connected to something much bigger than yourself, that these birds are so just mystically programmed to come to this place every year for millions of years and do this thing at sunrise and at sunset. And it just reminds you of kind of the magic of the universe.
Sunrise and sunset, Nebraska, February, March, feels like it'd be cold.
You have to dress in layers. It was, when we went, it could go down into the 20s or as high as the 40s. So you definitely, and you're standing out there for a good hour as the sun rises or sets. So you definitely need to dress in layers and, be a little bit hardy to do this. On the other hand, it's not like you're hiking miles or climbing mountains or anything like that. As long as you have good warm clothes, you'll be fine. I guess the other thing that is sort of interesting to me is there's also this kind of human aspect to this part of Nebraska. So I-80 runs right through this area. And of course, I-80 is a major crossroads of North America, right? And I-80 was built over a migration route for pioneers in the 19th century.
Right, this is on the Oregon Trail.
Oregon Trail, exactly. And the Oregon Trail was built over a route that Native Americans had used for, centuries and centuries and centuries. So, the other part of kind of the magic of this place and this notion of, humans and creatures making these treks right through the center of our continent. Again, there's something about that I found, kind of mystical and magical and beautiful. There's this hokey but wonderful museum that is built right above I-80. It's called the Archway, and it's a museum about migration, and they talk about the pioneers, the Oregon Trail, Native Americans, and also about 20th century auto travel, and it's just kind of fun. They have like life-size mannequins and diary excerpts from the pioneers and little artifacts, and to me, that's part of the story of going to this place that's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but that's actually the point, because you have to go through the middle of nowhere to get somewhere.
Well, exactly. I mean, not to get too philosophical about it, and of course the sort of thing that Midwesterners would look sideways at you if you started talking about it. What is the notion of a place that every creature passes through for one reason, for its own reasons, for one reason or another? But you could really get kind of lost in thinking about that.
Right. And, the other thing that I liked about it, kind of going back to this idea of like you could go on a bird watch and not really see the birds. And, most nature tours, and I've taken nature tours in many places to see all kinds of animals. Most of the time they'll say at the outset, we might see a moose in the woods of Maine if we're lucky, or we might see a bear, on this river in Alaska, but there's no guarantees, so don't be asking for your $49 back. The beautiful thing about this is you don't need to pay anybody to go stand by the river and watch thousands and thousands of birds do their thing. You can't miss them. You don't need binoculars. A 3-year-old can see these things and be captivated by them. It's a can't miss if you're the kind of person who thinks that, watching a kind of a nature phenomenon like this is worth doing. And, for us, I went with my husband. I went with my husband and we went for a long weekend, which was perfect because we had 2 nights when we could do a sunset visit. One was in Fort Kearny Park where, probably 150 or so people gather each night at this little bridge overpass to watch the birds come back to roost for the day. Another night, there's just kind of a pullout. There's a couple of bird organizations in the area. There's a thing called the Rose Sanctuary, ROWE. There is, there's a lot of Audubon activities and tours available. The local tourism board is very helpful in helping people just kind of find, where should you drive to, where do you park, where do the birds come. So it's all very easy in terms of putting a trip together. It's not like there's a secret. Your hotel will know where to send you. You can sign up for tours. You can sign up for like an overnight in a blind. And being a New Yorker, I didn't know what a blind was. Maybe our listeners do, but I'll just explain it in case somebody out there doesn't. It's just a little sort of camouflaged shelter in a natural place. Hunters use them sometimes to stake out, if they're hunting deer or pheasants or something like that. And the blinds that are located in this area are so that you get there at 4:30 in the morning if you want, and you can watch the birds take off at sunrise. So we did 2 sunset things on our own, and then this 4:30 in the morning one, I don't know, it was like $20 or something. They do, the ones where you go and sit in a blind, those do fill up. So we got lucky. We were on a waiting list, and I just kept calling back, and we finally got in. And there's also a festival in March. This year it's March 20th and 21st. That's going to be a very crowded weekend. So, for all I know, those spots are already taken up, and, hotels will probably be a little more expensive that weekend. But like I said, it's, mid-February to mid-April. March is probably the sweet spot, but maybe you want to do a weekend different from the festival, unless, of course, you want to go. There's talks and walks and a lot of organized activities. And they do have, they actually have overnights, which are a little bit pricey. But for professional photographers who want to be setting up equipment and things like that, there are all kinds of other options. What I liked about it was that it was a do-it-yourself, where you could just show up, stand by the side of the road at sunset, and see this thing unfold, and it was just so magical and so easy, and such a kind of a guarantee, as opposed to like we might see a moose or not.
Is there a qualitative difference or a difference in the experience seeing them take off at sunrise or seeing them come back after a hard day of foraging in the evening at sunset?
Well, the sunrise one, you're a little bit bleary, right? Because you had to get there at 4:30 in the morning. And I would say it's maybe a little more exciting because they're all asleep. You get there and it's completely quiet. In fact, it was a little bit like, as we're sitting there and it's just getting a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter, a beautiful deer just kind of waltzed right in front of our blind. And you just kind of felt the world waking up, and it was just kind of exciting, and then the noise, they're kind of murmuring and they're calling and cawing and squawking. It just starts out as this little tiny bubble, and then it just grows to this incredible, madness of this cacophony of noise. And you just kind of feel like you are experiencing, just like the birth of the world somehow. It's pretty amazing. The ones at sunset, I guess, are a little more raucous because more people come to them and they're kind of out in the open. Yeah, it's a slightly different vibe. It doesn't feel quite as special, maybe, and maybe just because it doesn't take quite as much effort to just show up at whatever time the sun sets in February.
It's Get Outta Here, the AP Travel Podcast. After the break, more about Sandhill cranes, about the nature of migration, and one of the most unusual restaurants in the entire Midwest. It's Get Outta Here, the AP Travel Podcast. After the break, more about Sandhill cranes, about the nature of migration, and one of the most unusual restaurants in the entire Midwest. It's Get Outta Here, the AP Travel Podcast. I'm Warren Levinson. Now more of our conversation with Beth Harpaz about those Sandhill cranes trip through Kearney, Nebraska. So a couple of things. Just back up here. A museum on an arch above I-80. What?
Yeah. So, it's because Nebraska has been this crossroads for migrating beasts and humans. And this museum is called the Archway, and actually you drive right past it if you're, kind of going anywhere. It's right in Kearney. And they literally built this bridge over I-80, and they installed the museum in it. And it's actually a really good museum. I mean, I go to a lot of historic sites and a lot of historic museums. I think some of the most compelling excerpts or the most compelling exhibits are these excerpts they have on display from Pioneer Diaries, which kind of detail the hardships and the hopes of this westward migration. One of the things that sticks in my mind was as people went farther along the way, they're getting so bogged down and the horses are getting weak and whatever, and they're just discarding stuff by the side of the road, including books. So people brought books with them, but then, as things went on and for whatever reason, they had to kind of shed weight. Yeah. One of the diary excerpts said that there were just piles of books and people would go and take a book, with them, which is kind of interesting, right? And, the Platte River is not only an ideal habitat for the cranes, but historically it served as a kind of a navigation guide and a water source for people on the move. Native Americans had shown that route to fur traders. The pioneers followed. And Fort Kearney, which is an actual historic state historic site, it was one of the last outposts for travelers heading west on the Oregon Trail and to Utah. There's a big Mormon migration story that's part of the theme of the museum. And, the museum, like I said, it also looks at automobiles, the rise of automobiles and road trips. I-80 is literally a modern version of the Oregon Trail. And it is an essential transcontinental pathway, as the museum people like to say. It's a great phrase. And I felt like it just kind of completed that circle from like 9 million years ago. What brought these birds here? How did they know, they're flying over on some, mystically programmed thing in their souls from south to north as the weather gets warm?
But that looks nice down there.
That's
a good place to stop. Let's try that. That's our south of the border.
Yeah, exactly right. And then just this idea that for people also there's something about the Platte River that has just kind of lured them there. And I guess the other thing I wanted to say is that there's not a lot else to do there, right? I mean, it's not even Omaha. It's Kearney, Grand Island.
Well, that was another question: is what kind of tourist infrastructure is there here? Do you find yourself booked into chain motels? Is there a lot of building around there that takes you away from this, as you're talking about, these mystical connections to nature that drew you so much to this place?
I would say there's, other than the museum and the birds and, Fort Kearney there's a historic site and a couple of these bird-related entities have pretty good little nature exhibits, and some of them have, a 20-minute documentary, a 20-minute film, and I definitely encourage people if they're going out there, especially since during the day you don't really have a lot to do, right? Because you're waiting for the sun to set or the sun to rise or something, so you've got a couple of days where you want to kind of fill your time. There is...
no crane-themed nightclubs, right?
If there were... We miss them. They're truly underground. We stayed in a chain hotel. There are many, many options for very reasonably priced hotels. You probably, if you're coming from outside the Midwest, you're probably going to fly into Omaha. You're going to have to rent a car. You're going to have to drive a couple of hours on I-80. You can consider yourself part of the great transcontinental migration as you're doing it. That said, I have to just give a shout out to like this one amazing thing that we experienced while we were there. So we're driving on I-80 and we see one of these billboards for Indian food at a truck stop. And it's just so like out of kilter with everything else, that we've experienced. We had been sent to a couple of local restaurants by locals. We thought they were okay, nothing to write home about. But suddenly there's this giant billboard for Indian food at a truck stop. It's called J.A.Y. Brothers. It was a little bit out of our way. I think it maybe took us 45 minutes to get there. It is Like, it is worth going to Nebraska just to eat at J Brothers Indian Restaurant in the truck stop. Even if you don't want to see the birds, just go for the Indian food, okay? So we go to this truck stop, and it's got like the magazines and, gum and deodorant and,
Trucker
beef
stuff.
jerky. Yeah, trucker stuff. Except that there's like this little old lady who looks like somebody's grandma from India at the cash register. Okay, that's fine. And we asked where the restaurant is, and she gestures to the back. We walk past the showers for the truckers into this kind of cafeteria-style room, and we can see the chef. He has a turban on, and a guy who looks like somebody's grandpa from India gives us a couple of menus. And you're in Nebraska. You're not seeing a very diverse population. It's not like riding the New York City subway. Okay, in this little room with maybe 50 chairs and tables, there were, people of every race and ethnicity from all around the earth. Clearly, they had all come. I mean, talk about transcontinental migration. This place is drawing, in fairness, there is a university nearby. So I think a lot of the students, the foreign students, and, faculty, whatever, they know this is a great place. I mean, it was extremely cheap. It was one of the best Indian meals I've ever had. Get the butter chicken. It's like the Indian grandma you never had would have made for you for dinner. It was just so fantastic. We just couldn't even believe how darn good it was. And there's actually been a couple of stories written about J Brothers and how they came to be at this truck stop. You can Google it if you want more info. But just whatever you do, just go eat there.
How conversant are you with the various cuisines of India to know what kind of cuisine is their specialty? Punjabi, Gujarati, Kashmiri, or?
I do not know, but the chef wore a turban, so that's probably a hint if you know much about India. It's a good question. I should know. I feel bad that I don't.
That's okay.
A Bollywood movie was playing on TV, and it was just good home-style food.
Back to the cranes.
Yes.
Endangered?
So, when 600,000 birds are showing up every year for 9 million years, it's hard to make the argument that they're endangered, right? I mean, this is not like, the last bald eagle because DDT has been killing them all in the 1950s and 60s, right? That said, their habitat is endangered. I mean, like so many natural places in the world, overdevelopment, water levels are dropping because of climate change. There's a concerted local effort to protect the Platte River and kind of the land around it to make sure that this place is preserved for them. Jane Goodall, the great naturalist and anthropologist, has been to see the birds more than a dozen times. I think that tells you if Jane Goodall is trekking here from, her travels, she's like showing up in Nebraska 12 times to see the birds because she thinks it's so amazing. It must be pretty amazing because she's seen some migrations in her time, right?
Right, yeah.
And
it has to matter if she's come to see.
Exactly. And, she's, you can hear her on YouTube talking about the cranes. She did a 60 Minutes episode on them. She's spoken at the University of Nebraska. And she one of the things she says is that, we do have to take care to preserve the land around the Platte River and make sure that we can, keep this place safe for the cranes so that they don't become endangered. One of the cool things, I didn't see this with my own eyes, but every year a couple of interlopers show up amid those 600,000, 500,000 birds. Some of these other types of cranes that are extremely rare, and you'll hear about it anywhere you go. They'll be very excited, like, we saw a whooping crane this morning, or we saw whatever crane that's there's only 100 of them left or something, and these other cranes kind of stand out because they look a little different, and they're just kind of hanging out with their 500,000 cousins. So you may see an endangered species while you're there if you're lucky and you're looking carefully.
Right, but this is just a really interesting thing. It just occurs to me they're named we call them the Sandhill cranes. So they're named for a midpoint spot on their journey, not for where they spend the whole winter or where they spend the whole summer, but at least that's what we call them.
Yeah, I don't know much about how they came to be called that. And, you asked me at the beginning, like, what do they look like? They're not so amazing to behold.
Not as individuals.
Not as individuals, right. It's the massive nature of this spectacle that is what makes it so incredible, and just understanding that this journey is this thing that has been going on, for so many eons.
Beth Harpaz is the former Associated Press travel editor and the former host of this program. And now, my favorite trip. Matilda Williams, who works in youth services at the Montclair, New Jersey Public Library, grew up down the road in Newark. Her parents were part of the Great Migration of Black Americans from the Jim Crow South to the not as obviously segregated industrial North. When we met the other day at an art opening and started talking about travel, she talked about being 11 years old in 1962 and visiting her grandma's place in South Carolina for the first time. It was eye-opening.
In the early 60s, my mother took me down south. And I was able to see the fountains that says colored and white. I was shocked. I also lived through I never went down south again for 30 years because by living in Newark, we did see a little bit, but we didn't see the fountains. I never seen outhouses before.
Specifically obvious.
Yes, it was too obvious for me, and it was kind of like, that's not for me. Like I say, I was in the riots. As far as the riots, we lived right there in Prince Street. So we were able to experience everything. In 1968, Martin Luther King came to visit Southside High School, which was a pleasure for everyone.
Tell me about that first trip down south. You were how old?
Oh man, it was like it had to be 1962. So I was born in 1951. So you did the math. Yeah, it makes me 11. So
you're from Newark. So you're going from Newark, and where did you go?
We went to Gifford, South Carolina, Columbia. Yeah, my mother was born in the South. Had 9 kids. She didn't get education because she only had a fifth. She went to 5th grade, but she had to work at the cotton field. So typical. So we would get in a car. Put your little chicken in your little shoe boxes. That's how you travel. Certain places you couldn't stop, where you couldn't really stop, so we would drive all night. It was a car full of us. And like I said before, we got to my grandmother's house, which was a shack. Seriously, a shack. Even while I was down there, I saw her rip the head of a chicken. I wouldn't eat it. This is how they, no, forget about it. The outhouse, I hardly went to the bathroom. So those is, with the smooth, the smell of the food and stuff, cooking was perfect. That was the good part and everything. But so that was life. I don't know. It was a good experience.
And when you saw the signs that said, white only, colored only, which was, I'm sure something you'd heard about but hadn't actually seen, what did you think?
Yeah, you didn't know at that age. You didn't even really know what to think. You knew it was there, but you go, oh yeah, it's there. Like I said, as time went along. I mean, even when Jersey, you've seen some parts of, by me being a dark-skinned person, maybe some jobs maybe I didn't get because of my complexion. My sister being light-skinned, she was more welcome. So, that's how, definitely, you get over it. You're always going to remember it. My eyes on the prize and stuff like that. You look at this, you look at all these documentary, you're always going to remember what happened. Hopefully you don't want to see it again, but I don't think people believe it who never lived it, that, this happened.
Matilda Williams works with kids at the Montclair Public Library in New Jersey. And that's the show. Get Outta Here is a production of the Associated Press in partnership with Westwood One, produced under the supervision of Nikessa Moody and Peter Costanzo. I'm Warren Levinson. We'll see you next time.